Today's episode, it's just me and you. I am not interviewing anyone. I am just sharing my thoughts. I recently experienced the death of my aunt, a beloved aunt, and I went to her service and I wanted to share my experience. And it wasn't just the experience of the service, it was the experience of my thoughts. I got some lessons from these thoughts. Often when somebody dies, particularly somebody you love dies, you reflect. And I reflected a lot. I traveled up to Massachusetts for her service and stayed with my cousin and had some family time. So I today's episode is about that experience and two particular lessons that I want to share with you, but I also want to give you some background on my family, my father's sisters, because it makes a difference in hearing the story. So I hope you enjoy it. And if you get any inspiration on taking action from it, I'd love to hear from you. So send me a note, an email, or a message on social. Sometimes I like to do episodes that are just me talking, and that is what I'm doing today. No interviews today because I had an experience of going up to Massachusetts for my aunt's funeral. And maybe it will inspire you, maybe it'll cause you to think, reflect, but just things that gave me pause. And often happens when you lose somebody suddenly. She was, although 84, very vital, so much fun, and I thought I would see her again, and now I'm not. So I wanted to share a couple lessons from this experience. It's been a crazy busy fall. I had my retreat a couple weekends ago, which was amazing, I will say, but it was intense for me because that takes a lot out of you. You're dedicating 2 full days to be with people and to help them come to breakthroughs. And right before that happened, I found out my aunt died. So I'm trying to find out when the service is going to be and trying to plan my time around that. And in addition, right after the retreat, I had committed to my younger daughter to watch my grandkids for a week. And I'm very lucky. I have a full time job, but I can take my job anywhere. So I have computer, will travel. So I was able to spend some time with my grandsons who are in school. So I worked during the week, but kids, they have a lot of energy, especially boys, 3.5 and 6. And I was on from before 7 in the morning, making lunches, getting them off to school, and then at night, dinner and entertaining them. Then the day I came home, unpacked and packed, and left the next morning early to catch a flight to Massachusetts, where I spent 4 days, 3 nights with my cousin. So I want to tell you about my aunt Brenda, and I want to tell you two things. It's interesting what you learn from these things, the thoughts you have about life, and I'm fortunate enough to have this vehicle, my podcast, to share lessons that, hey, this was my experience, and maybe you can do things differently because of my experience, the choices that I made, or that my aunt made, or that someone else in her life made. And maybe that's not the way you want to do things, or maybe it is. It's your choice. But I thought I'd share her story because it's pretty powerful. So, the first thing that I want to share is about not delaying time with loved ones. And I know this is a difficult because we none of us have a crystal ball. We don't know when we're going to go. And especially in cases where somebody looks fine. I mean, they're healthy, they're active, they're going about their business, even though they're in their 80s. But we don't know how long we have. And the regret that I have from not visiting her this year, because I thought I was going to see her again. I did not think I'd never see her again. If I thought, oh my gosh, I'm not going to see her again, I would have made the effort. But busy life, busy summer with the grandkids, trips, having them here, then my retreat, focused on that, football games on the weekend. You have your routines and taking time off work and all the things that make us decide to not do something when deep down we really want to do something. And I really wanted to go and visit. I have two aunts left. So my dad had three sisters. He had one older sister and two younger sisters. And his oldest sister died first, then he died, and this is the sister that was right after him, and then his youngest sister is still alive. And so I love my two aunts, and did see them after my dad died. My sister and I had gone up and visited them for a few days. And you hear things, you hear family stories that you wouldn't necessarily have heard, or maybe you heard them when you're younger, but they didn't resonate. And now that you're older, I remember when I went to see them a few years ago, they pulled out a letter my dad had written when he was 18 to his mother. And he was on his way to drive from Massachusetts to Texas, where he went to SMU. That's where he met my mom. And just to hear and read the 18-year-old version of my father was something that I would have never have been able to do if I hadn't made that trip to go visit them. And so it's moments like that. It's being with my cousins and having that time together because we have the same DNA, and there's something to be said for being amongst the people that have your DNA. We have similar mannerisms, even though they speak funny because they're from Boston. We moved to Virginia. My dad actually was born and raised in Boston. I was born in Boston, but my parents moved to Virginia when I was about 18 months old. And so I never got the accent, but my dad never had the accent, which is very interesting. But I do love those accents. And people will say I have an accent, but they have an accent. But I love it. I love the park, the car, and the yard. And so my grandparents and my three aunts lived up in Massachusetts. And it was so much fun to go visit them when I was a kid. We would go up in the summers. My parents had the summers off because they were both teachers, and they had an antique store. And so we would go and hang out at the antique store. I still love the smell of antique stores. They had a candy corner, and I would get free candy. Like, how amazing was that? They'd say, go pick out whatever candy you want. Of course, that's amazing. My aunt, who just died, as long as I've known her, she has not been married. She has been single her whole life. However, she was married when she was very young. So that's going to lead into this next story. But so I'm going to tell you two lessons. The first lesson: do not delay spending time with family. If the thought comes, oh, I should go and make that trip, make that trip, make those memories. I had that thought and I didn't make the trip. And now I won't ever see her again. I got to see pictures of her. I got to be in her house, but she was not there. And for that, I am so sad and so regretful that I didn't listen to my heart, because I'm so much about listen to your heart, do what, do the nudge, do whatever the download is. But, our brain gets in the way, and, oh, I don't have the vacation. I don't have the this. I don't have the that. That's an effort. Things that take effort, we tend to avoid. If I had gone, it would have been like the previous time I had gone. I would have heard stories. I would have had these memories etched in my brain that I won't have because she's gone. So that's number one lesson. And the second lesson is a little deeper, and I have to give you a little background before I get into it. So my aunt, as I said, was married briefly, and she got pregnant and didn't want to keep the child. So she made the decision to give the child up for adoption. So she did that. That was my cousin. The catch, the catch of the story is that my oldest aunt, my dad's older sister, couldn't have children with her husband. They weren't able to have children. They were infertile. Of course, if we had in vitro back then, they probably would have been able to. But supposedly he had a low sperm count. And so they could not have children. And so my aunt decided to give her baby up for adoption, but she didn't adopt. She didn't go through the formal process. She essentially gave her baby to my grandmother. And I didn't know about this until I was older and I heard the whole story. But she gave her baby to her mother, my grandmother, who raised her for what I understand was about a year. And then when my aunt and her husband, my other aunt, couldn't have a child, they gave the baby to the older sister. And so my cousin was raised as an adopted child. She thought she was adopted. I knew because my parents always told my sister and I the truth that she's really your cousin. Isn't the point of my lesson, but what I will say to that is don't burden young children with that when it's a big secret. You don't tell little kids big secrets and tell them they have to keep the secret because it's a burden. And so, yes, I knew my cousin was my real cousin, although she didn't know I was her real cousin. So fast forward, it caused a lot of problems as she grew up and she discovered in her teens that she really was her aunt's daughter, that her aunt was her real mother. And so coming to terms with the fact that, oh my gosh, it's family that I always thought I always wanted and wondered who my real family was, to find out that these are her real grandparents, that her real mother is her aunt and her aunt is her adopted mother. Crazy, right? So you can imagine she didn't handle it well at the time, but we're not equipped when we're 14, 15 years old to handle things like this. And at the time, her adoptive mother had gotten a divorce from her adoptive father and was dating men and ended up marrying one, which really isn't good when you're a teenager and this, you know, other man's brought into your life and they didn't see eye to eye. And there was a lot of fighting and disowning and that kind of thing that happened. And so just want to fast forward because there's a lot of stuff that happened in between, but that's not important for the story. So when I heard that she had died, of course, I was devastated. I was not only devastated for the fact that I'll never see her again and I won't have those memories to make, I'm devastated for my cousin who lost her real mother. And the amazing thing is that in the past few years, she and my aunt, her real mother, have grown so close, so extremely close. And I feel like my cousin finally got the real mother relationship she never had, the unconditional love that maybe she didn't feel she had. And so that was lovely. In fact, my cousin told me when I was up there, I stayed with her while I was in Massachusetts for the service. And my cousin said that she was my best friend. She lost her best friend. And they talked more every day than I talked to my own mother when my mother was alive. And so I thought that was beautiful. It was beautiful that they had come to a place where they truly were mother and daughter. And the lesson that I want to share with you is that, and I found this out about a year ago, is that my aunt had had a true love her whole life. In fact, there was a photo taken when my cousin was like 2 years old of the three of them. And a minor twist to the story, which probably isn't important to the whole story, is that he was related to a family member through marriage. And so my cousin told me that he had actually met her for the first time when she was pregnant with my cousin. So that's how long, I guess she was 22-ish when she had my cousin, and she died when she was 84. So this is a 60-year love affair, 62-year love affair. But what happened to that relationship is that although he loved her and she loved him, she didn't want to have kids. And he asked her to marry him, and she said, "No, I don't want to have any more kids." He wanted to have kids. And so he moved on and met somebody and had kids. I don't know. I'm sure there are periods of them not being together, but ultimately they stayed in touch and they continued to have a love affair with each other. They would go away together about 3 or 4 times a year. Apparently had crazy sex. I just can't imagine 84-year-old couple. I guess it happens. And more power to them, right? Great. But they were crazy in love. And so maybe that happens more when you only see each other 3 or 4 times a year. He still is married. And so for him, it was secret. I mean, for both of them, it was a secret. It was a secret, torrid romance, one of a novel, right? So you might think, oh, how unethical, right? You can judge, anybody can judge, right? But I wanted to tell you this story because I think it's so sad that they weren't able to live who they really were, who they loved. They weren't able to live in their truth. And that is not being truly authentic. Hiding a romance, hiding who you are, not being brave enough to say, this is who I am, this is who I love, and I am going to be with that person. And maybe it's because I had a similar situation where I was in love with somebody else and I was married, but I chose, and it was hard. Let me tell you, it was the scariest thing ever. But I chose to be open and honest and say, I am done. I don't want to be in the marriage anymore. But I was intentional about not ever having an affair. And so people can choose however they want to progress into this honesty. But for me, that's what I did, and I couldn't be authentic in a marriage where I wasn't living my truth. And and so to me, this was a lesson I wanted to share because I find it so, so sad that they had to have this big secret, and secrets always come out. Secrets don't stay secret forever. And when she died, she was with him. She told people about this love, but nobody ever knew who it was. So people get hurt regardless. And maybe some people say, well, I'm just going to stay in an unhappy marriage. And I don't think that's a good choice either, because again, you're not being authentic. You're not being true to yourself. And yes, it may hurt for a little bit, but just like a wound that requires a band-aid, wounds heal over time. And so for me, and this is just my perspective, you can choose to have your own perspective. Everybody has that right. But I'm saying this for the person that this is resonating with because you're living some kind of secret and you're not being authentic. You're not being true to yourself. You're not being true to what you want in life, who you want to be with in life. So now she died when she was with him on one of these excursions. And in a way, she died in the loveliest way. She was at dinner with him, looking into his eyes. He had just given her the most beautiful note. It was like 3 sentences. "I loved you then, I love you now, I'll love you forever." I mean, it was like, heart-wrenching. But my cousin found it in her suitcase, and he had given her a beautiful necklace. She was having a wonderful time. And so she was at her favorite restaurant looking in his eyes, and she had a heart attack. Her eyes went big and she drooped her head, and she got CPR right away, but she didn't survive. And he's devastated, obviously. He's devastated. His weekend ended abruptly, losing the love of his life. And then he couldn't be a part of any of the service because it's a secret. Nobody knows about it. But of course, people know now because who is she with? Where was she? What happened? She was with him. Who is he? So secrets never stay secrets. So when you think you're protecting somebody, isn't it worse to have died and then have people find out these secrets? I think secrets will always catch up with you. So that lesson is simply, if you are somebody living a secret, don't think you're not going to hurt the people you love by keeping the secret. It's been a very interesting experience. I realize that a lot of people have secrets. A lot of people have secrets. This family in particular. So, not the only secret. It's the only one I'm sharing today. But did also want to share the other important lesson besides be authentic to who you are and don't keep secrets. Don't delay seeing the people you love, making the effort, carving out the time. If you feel it, if you think it, if it's something that comes up that I should give that person a call, or I should make an effort to go visit and allocate some time. So it's so crazy the way life unfolds, and we never know what it will bring. But I just felt it was an important point to share, about as the older we get, to make the time and to live in your truth. So that's what I wanna leave you with, and I hope you can do that. Thanks for listening.